I want you to feel is that in your seat, you can actually become a little lighter. Use your breath to expand your inner body, almost to the point that you can tip your sit bones back far enough to lift them off whatever you're sitting on. And now I'm sitting on a block today, and if you have a block handy or a rolled up blanket or a pillow or something to sit on, just to prop yourself up, to give you that extra lift, I want you to feel that you can use your breath to literally become a little lighter. Now, just to be clear, I don't want you to be ungrounded. I don't want you to kind of uproot yourself so powerfully that you float away from your mat into the clouds. But I want you to feel that you can move and distribute the weight of your body to become a little lighter in your foundation, to become a little lighter on your feet as we practice today. So as you are practicing, what I want you to think about is what the term lightness means to you, what it means to feel a little lighter on your feet or on your hands, or in your daily life, what it means to kind of be a little lighthearted. So with that, take a nice comfortable seat. Sit up tall as you can without overworking or straining your body in any particular direction. And on your next inhalation, float your arms up overhead. And as your arms rise up, let them be held in this kind of unusual position with less muscular strength and more of just the breath. So breathe deep, and you can notice that I tend to lift my chin and roll my neck a little bit to kind of gauge how I'm holding tension with my head on my shoulders. And I'm going to try and breathe so that my head is suspended over top of my shoulders with the least amount of effort possible. Take a few deep breaths and really reach up as if you're reaching for something with the fingertips. And as if you're holding something, pull down and lean forward ever so slightly and see if you can tip your sit bones to hover just barely over top of your block or your blanket or whatever you're sitting on. And then reach them back, let them touch lightly, and as you come back into your seat, float your hands down and together at the center of your heart with just your fingertips touching. Close your eyes for just a few breaths and center your awareness. And when I say center, I want you to focus on what your intention is for practicing today. The lesson I'm bringing to you is the idea of making yourself lighter, whatever that means in your life, what it means to you to be lighter, whether it's physically, emotionally, psychologically, or spiritually. I want you to focus on manifesting that as you practice today. And on your next inhalation, to seal that intention, let your heart rise gently toward your hands. And as you exhale, gently bow your head toward your fingertips. And on your next inhalation, gently release your hands. Lift your head and open your eyes. Place your block or your blanket or whatever you were sitting on to the side and come up standing at the top of your mat. Now, with your hands on your hips, I want you to kind of just feel that your hips are balanced. Place your feet a little wider than hip distance apart and lift and spread all 10 toes up off the mat. Now, with all 10 toes up and the kind of the action pulling energy up through your legs, I want you to feel how heavy the balls of your big toes become. Feel how heavy your heels become. Even feel if your knees locked out or your legs became kind of rigid. I want you to feel how grounded you can be in this case, because we're going to go from here and try to make ourselves a little bit lighter without uprooting ourselves from our foundation. So with that, place your big toes down only. And if this is your first time doing this, it may take a little bit of practice and a little maneuvering, so don't take it too seriously if it doesn't work the first time, but really root down through big toes. Spread the little toes as wide as you can, and then relax your fingers. Relax your hands. Oftentimes the fingers will curl up because of that. And then with your hands sliding down to your knees, bend your knees, and just allow yourself to rest with straight arms. Push down against the knees, really to ground yourself. And then from here, let the shoulders and the neck relax, even let them roll around a little bit, and breathe so that the upper back is broad with breath, the collarbones and the chest is broad with breath. And then from there, pushing powerfully with your hands down against your knees, pushing your knees up into your hands, let your heels float lightly off the mat. So with the big toes gripping and the other toes spreading wide, let the heels float without having to turn your knees or your ankles out too much. So you may need to waver just a little bit to feel that balance. And then let the heels lightly come back down to the ground and settle. Spread the toes wide again if they kind of got a little curled up. Root down through the soles of your feet powerfully. Push down against your knees with your hands. Breathe into the upper back and neck, and then float the heels again. Keep the breath full and steady. Push the hips a little further back this time. Open the belly and stretch it a little further forward this time. And then lightly let the heels come down. Come up on the fingertips now on tops of your knees, so your hands are a little lighter on the knees. Keep the same rootedness through the soles of your feet, and with your fingertips up on your thighs, float the heels again. Breathe. Relax the shoulders and the neck. and then let the heels come down. What I'm doing is really just trying to pique your awareness of how you hold your balance through your toes and through your ankles. Sit down a little lower, one more time, lift the heels, staying up on fingertips on the knees. Breathe, let the shoulders relax, the neck and jaw relax, and then let the heels lightly come down. Now, one more time, we're gonna do 2 rounds. Take the arms up, hold the breath steady, with the torso roughly on a diagonal with regards to the ground. Spread the toes wide, and as if you're holding something with the fingertips, use the breath to make yourself a little lighter, float the heels. Relax the jaw. Okay, you should feel the work now. In each of these different positions, feel how your body is responding differently. And let the heels lightly settle down. Keep the arms up and breathe. So the arms are held with less effort than just the physical strength. Let the breath hold the arms. One more time, with the toes spread wide, lift the heels. Sit down a little lower. Keep the breath full. And now with the knees bent and the heels lifted, on your next inhalation, lift your torso a little more upright. Keep the breath full and stretch the belly and the rib cage long away from the hips. Breathe, feel the balance, feel the charge of the legs. You can even waver a little bit. You can sway the arms, relax the neck and the jaw. And then slow motion, as if you're holding something with the fingertips, keep the heels lifted and slow motion rise. Stand up tall, keeping the knees soft and the hips soft, making yourself as light as possible. Let the heels slowly and lightly come to the ground. Interlace your fingers above your head and press your heels of your hands and your thumbs to the crown of your head. With the toes staying spread, bend your knees, and as the knees bend and the hips go back and down, press your head up into your hands and open your throat. Breathe deep. Let the shoulders kind of move freely. Let the neck move relatively freely, even though the head is pressing up, and on your next inhalation, lean to the right. Bend the knees deep, sit down low, and again, float the heels. Feel how the legs become a little more sensitive. Lean a little further to the right and breathe. Press the head up into the hands. And then keeping the action and the awareness of the back body and the heels lifted, float the arms. Breathe into the shoulders. Breathe into the upper neck and the collarbones and the shoulder blades. Float on the toes, letting the heels bounce a little bit. And then release your heels. Inhale, come back up to center with the arms up. Reset the foundation. Toes spread wide, knees are soft, hips are soft. Interlace the fingers and press the thumbs to the crown of the head. Press the head up into the thumbs and inhale, lean to the left. Send the hips back. Keep the toes active. Keep the hips rooted into the sockets and lift the heels. Bend the knees a little deeper, lean a little further, and then on your next inhalation, take the arms out. Hold the torso suspended on the breath. Expand the rib cage. Keep the hips rooting powerfully and stretch the belly long and lean a little further to the left. Good, then inhale, come back up, stretch fully, become as light as possible with the heels lifted, and then let the heels settle down and let your arms come down to your side for Tadasana. Just let yourself settle for a second. Now, as you settle and as you come out of the pose, you become grounded again through the heels and the big toes and the big toe mounds. Try not to let that settling lead to a complete release of the body, okay? So the work that you're doing over the next hour or however long this class ends up being, even if it were 2 hours, how would you maintain that sense of lightness in your body? How would you maintain that kind of buoyancy or that fullness of your expression? That's what I want you to feel every time you come back to a familiar place, that you maintain the sensitivity that allows you to expand the light both within and outside of your body. So lift the heart. In your full stance right here in Tadasana, make as much space in your inner body as possible, so much space that your inner body starts to expand out into your outer body. And then with that space, inhale, float the arms again, as if you're holding something with your fingertips. Let the heels hover just slightly off the ground. Be more sensitive through the toes. You can even bounce a little bit. Let the knees soften, and then keeping the length that you've created here. Opening the throat, letting the neck relax and the shoulders be soft, even though they're up overhead, start to bow forward. Bending your knees as much as you need to maintain the shape and sensitivity of your back. So as you bow, go super slow. Feel how your back engages as your body becomes more susceptible to gravity. Try to maintain that sense of lightness even as more surface area starts to get pushed down. Sit down low and slow, keeping the heels lifted. Keep your gaze forward and lightly touch with your fingertips. So the knees can bend pretty deep just to keep an awareness of the back body. With the heel staying up, step your right foot back. Come onto fingertips, bend your right knee so that it hovers above the ground. With your left heel staying up, take your left hand to your knee, and then take your right hand to your knee and pause and breathe. So left heel is still up, not to torture you, but to allow you to be a little more sensitive. That essence of lightness requires a certain sensitivity. Let the hips sway a little bit, bend the right knee a little deeper, and then inhale, float the arms forward, and softly rise with the torso, keeping the hips rooted with how you hold the toes, how you engage the legs, even though the left heel is still up. And then slowly, as you exhale, bow forward and touch on fingertips. Keep the left heel lifted, step the right foot forward to meet the left, and rise up, bring your hands to your knees. Heels are still up, sink the hips back and down, stretch your arms forward, slow motion, lift your torso. Breathe. When you get to the top and you're in this full expression, kind of create that sense of lightness, even though the feet and legs are having to work with the heels up. Keep that sense of space and lightness as you bow forward. Heels still up. Bear with me, we're going to do the other side, and then we'll take a break. Breathe deep. Hips go back. Heels are still up. Float down, keeping the sensitivity in your back. Lightly touch on fingertips. So fingertips here maintains that sensitivity that you have with your heels lifted. Step the left foot back. Bend your left knee so it hovers. Right heel is up. Bring your right hand to your knee, and then make yourself light enough through how you engage the legs to bring your left hand up, and then root the hips back. Push down powerfully, even though the right heel is up, and float the arms forward and rise. Breathe deep. Expand the upper back. Soften the back of your neck with your breath. Sink the left knee down a little lower. Take a deep breath in. And as you exhale, lightly touch on fingertips and step back into all fours, staying on fingertips if possible. Now, just a note on the foundation of the hands. From fingertips, keeping the fingertips active, come down to ridge tops, so the knuckles root down to the ground, as you can see with my hands, but the heels of my hands stay up and my thumbs serve like a kickstand. Notice the balance of my wrist. So look at my wrist with fingertips, then look at my wrist with knuckles down, and notice that the wrist doesn't really change shape. It's not until I let the heels of my hands drop that my wrist tends to start to bend, okay? What I see in a lot of people is that they'll collapse their wrists and let their knuckles and fingertips float. Whenever you place your hands in my classes, please keep your fingertips, knuckles rooted so that when the heels of the hands come down, they come down lightly. So with the heels of your hands down, walk your knees and toes back. So you have to kind of stretch your chest forward to put weight into your hands. Then from there, let the heels of the hands rise up and let them come back down lightly. Lift them again, let them come back down lightly. One more time. Lift up, grip with the fingertips, press down into the knuckles, and then let the heels of the hands lightly settle, almost barely touching the ground. And from there, lift your knees lightly and start to tip your sit bones up and back into what's called crouching cat in the Sri Daiva methodology. Bend your knees, send your hips up high, and breathe into the upper back, and let your shoulders sway a little bit. Let your neck relax without letting your head collapse. So when the head just drops, oftentimes we lose a kind of sight of our intention. So take your gaze slightly behind your thumbs and let your chest and rib cage draw forward between your arms as you pull your hips back in resistance. So hips rise and pull back as the chest and rib cage draws forward, and the stretch you feel across your belly and your back should be one of creating a little bit of tension, a little tension that allows you to be lighter on your feet and more grounded and steady in your hands. So start to bend the knees and float a little bit, rocking forward onto the toes, lifting the hips up high. And then I want you to start to float a little higher and see if you can lift your feet lightly off the ground, like you're jumping. Keep the breath steady and full, and slowly, taking as many jumps, maybe 4 or 5 jumps, I want you to hop towards the top of your mat on your toes the whole way, as quietly and as softly as possible. Land on your toes, lift your palms to come onto your fingertips, bend your knees, and softly rise, bring your hands up to your knees as we started. Root down with the arms straight, push down against your knees, push your knees up into your hands, and sit down a little lower. Breathe deep. And then from here, inhale, stretch your arms forward, make yourself light, Keeping the legs steady, slow motion, lift your torso upright, keeping the knees bent and the hips back. Breathe and expand the rib cage and the chest as you rise up, and then slow motion rise to stand. And then exhale, release your heels, step your feet a little closer and release your hands, and come to that same Tadasana that you had that has that essence of lightness and fullness in it. Good, and then from there, step your right foot back. Take a wide stance with your hands on your hips. Feet, outer edges of the feet parallel to the outer and smaller edges of your mat. With your hands on your hips, bend your knees, sink your hips back a little bit to engage the back body. The back body and the muscles of the back body are the muscles of suspension. So when they're engaged, you have a little more power to kind of stay upright and have freedom to kind of keep your torso uplifted. Root the hips, send them back, and then lift the belly and the torso, and inhale, take the arms up. With the arms floating above the head, breathe deep. Make as much space around the thickest part of your rib cage as you can as you inhale. And as you exhale, feel as if you're pulling your hips down away from your rib cage and your hands. So lift the chest and the torso up away from the hips. Keep that length, as much length as you've created in this upright position. Maintain it as long as possible as you bow forward. Send the hips back. Keep the toes active. Stretch the rib cage and the torso forward away from the hips. Keep the legs strong, the hips steady, and then softly, when you're ready, release your fingertips slightly to touch the ground. Come on to fingertips. Keeping the arms straight, just be sensitive. Let the hips and the shoulders roll a little bit. You can rock and sway from side to side. Keep the breath steady. Pause in the middle. Walk your hands a little bit in front of your hips. Lean into your fingertips and let the heels of your feet lightly float off the ground. From there, maintaining the sense of lightness, come down to ridge top. So the knuckles of your hands come down, fingertips still spread wide, heels of your hands up, and the thumbs like a kickstand. Lift the heels of the feet a little higher. Now from here, breathe into the upper back, relax the neck and shoulders without collapsing the head, and let the palms come flat, lifting the heels of your feet even higher. Breathe into the upper back. Try to make your hips, your feet, and your toes light enough that you could float and come onto the very tips of your toes. Breathe deep, root down from the breath in the upper back into the hands and lift the hips as high as you can. And then rock back from there onto the balls of your feet. Let the heels come almost to touch the ground, but just to hover above it and come onto fingertips. Bend the knees, root the hips back towards the wall behind you and walk your fingertips back until your hands are light enough to float off the ground. Stretch your arms forward, and as the body is susceptible to gravity here, it's pretty heavy, so hold steady with the strength of your legs. Be strong in the legs, and slow motion come upright with your torso. Heels are still up. Oh my gosh. Keep the heels lifted. Stretch the torso up high when you get upright, and then let the heels come down softly. Maintain that sense of lightness so the arms stay up overhead, and breathe. And as you exhale, let the arms float down parallel to the ground. With the palms turned up and the elbows slightly bent, hold your arms in this position more with the breath than with the muscular strength. Turn your left toes out to point towards the front of your mat, and as the toes turn out, line your knee up with the center of your mat, or with the center of your toes, and make sure your hips stay square towards the wall that you're facing, towards this long edge of the mat. Try to keep your torso square towards that long edge of the mat as well. So if when you turn your toes out, your hips turned with you and your torso turned with you, try to bend your back knee and keep the hips steady, and you keep your torso steady, square to where the hips are facing. Open the throat and breathe. And the reason I'm giving you a little bit of a lecture on alignment is because I want to test the muscular strength of your arms. I want you to be able to feel that you can hold your arms up and suspend them with fullness, with more than just the muscular strength. Relax the jaw, relax the neck. As the shoulders start to burn, breathe a little more deeply and see if you can expand your chest and become a little lighter through the torso. Lengthen the torso up high, keep the hips rooted down low, and slow motion begin to bow. Bowing forward softly between your legs, keeping the length, keeping the arms out wide. Release your right hand to the ground, take your left hand to your inner knee, and push. With the right hand on fingertips, be sensitive. Push with the left hand against the knee and lean back away from your left hip. So this stretch you feel through the left side body and the rib cage is really broadening the space between your torso and your hip. right at the hip flexor. Breathe into that left side body to make it stretch long. Breathe into both shoulders so that there's space to move the torso. Soften your outer body and open up the left hip powerfully. If you're not feeling that much of a stretch here, you can bring the hand more towards the inner thigh and root the inner thigh back. The more you bend the knees, the more you'll feel this as well. You can even sway the hips a little bit. Take a deep breath in, and then as you exhale, release the left hand, turn the left toes in, and come back to that wide standing forward bend, and just let yourself settle. Breathe deep. On fingertips, bend your knees again, walk your hands a little further forward, come down to ridge tops. Keep the breath full on ridge tops, lift the heels of your feet up, grip the mat with the toes. Keep the breath full so the upper back is spacious. It's not moving the shoulders too far forward out of the sockets, too high or too far back into the sockets, or too far in any direction. So you have balance, and that's what I mean by sensitivity and lightness. Use that sense of lightness to make space. Let the heels of the hands come down, lift the heels of the feet up high, and keep the breath full so you can come onto tiptoes again. Keep the breath full, push the weight down into the hands, see if you can float. Maybe even just barely lift the tips of your toes up off the mat. Rock back on the balls of your feet, come up onto fingertips, bend your knees, walk your hands back, and inhale, float the arms. Lift the chest and look in the direction that your fingertips are pointing. Open the throat and breathe, holding yourself suspended with the strength of the legs. There's a reason why I'm holding you here. It's because the test of lightness is much more challenging. Slow motion rise, keeping your heels up. Lift the chin and the chest. Stretch the torso long and release the heels. Release the arms to parallel with the ground, holding the hips steady and the torso, both sides of the body facing the direction that your hips are facing. Turn just your right toes out so that your knee lines up with the center of your toes. Bend into both knees. Now this is a lot different from traditional Virabhadrasana 2, where the palms turn down, the arms go straight, and the back knee straightens. So I want you to be a little more balanced, even to the point that with both knees bent, you could bounce a little bit, or even lift the heels up a little bit and still bounce. With the heels down, lift the chin and the chest, bend the elbows, and open the throat so your body, front body, is lifting and making space, and the back body is engaged. Take a few deep breaths, and as the shoulders start to burn, again, create that sense of lightness so the arms are held with more than just the muscular strength, and then hinge at the hips. Bow forward slow. The reason I like you to go slow is we start to feel more. We start to be a little more engaged, a little more sensitive, and that's the name of the game today. Touch lightly with left hand on the ground. Bring your right hand to your inner knee and push out. And as you push the knee out behind you, lean back away from it, broadening the right rib cage, stretching into the right side body. And to deepen the stretch, you can bring your right hand closer to the thigh socket. Push on the inner thigh powerfully. Bend the right knee and the left knee a little deeper, and make space. Good, and then release and touch the ground. Turn the right toes in. This time, lift the heels just to float, bend the knees. We're not gonna go towards the handstand prep. We're just gonna float the hands, this time interlacing the fingers and pressing the hands on top of the head to ground yourself. Press your head up and back into your hands and look forward in slow motion with the heels lifted, come up standing. Open the throat, lift the chin and the chest, and then with your heels lifted, bounce a little bit. Heels lifted, knees bent. Take as many steps as you need to, pivot and step to the top of your mat with the heels of your hands rooting down on the top of your head. Once you get there and your feet are grounded, heels are still up, pull your hips down and stretch the rib cage and the belly up high. Sit down low and then inhale, stretch the arms. Open the throat, lift the chest. Create that sense of lightness with how you kind of embody the energy of lightness and your definition of it. And then slow motion rise to stand. Keep that sense of lightness even as the heels come down and become heavier, and even as the hands release and the arms become a little heavier. Use the breath to settle your energy. Good. Bring your hands to your hips. Lift and spread all 10 toes wide, and then press just the big toes down like we've done before. Spread the little toes as wide as you can with the big toes as like an anchor, and then let them settle and relax your fingers. Okay, so the idea of lightness is to kind of just make yourself a little more movable, a little more functional. So let yourself kind of settle. And then with your right toe staying grounded, lift your left heel until just the very tip of your big toe is on the ground. Now, move your left toe around like you're digging a hole on your mat. So scrape at the mat just a little bit with your big toe, and then come to pause with just the pad of your big toe grounded, and try and spread the little toes as wide as possible. Bend your right knee. With the little toes of your left foot spread and the big toe as an anchor, keep that action in the foot, lift the foot off the ground, and cross your ankle over top of your right knee. Now, with your hands on your hips, square the hips towards the wall in front of you, towards the wall you're facing, and start to bend your right knee deep. Oftentimes when we bend and balance on one leg, we'll twist and turn the hips. So I want you to hold the hips steady and sit down low. If you can, lifting the belly and lengthening the torso as your hips descend, bring your hands to your front shin just so you can ground yourself, and then try to breathe to make yourself a little lighter. So as you've grounded the hands, roll the shoulders around a little bit. Let the neck relax as we've done before. Try to be softer in how you put effort into this pose. And then sit down a little lower. We go a little deeper. Once we've made that sense of lightness and created the space, oftentimes we have more freedom to go a little further. So sit down low as you can, with the toes active, both on the left foot and the right foot. Inhale, take the arms forward and stretch the torso long, and then slow motion rise and come upright, rooting the hips down low, keeping the fingertips active, keeping the toes active. Even as the right leg and hips start to burn, hold steady with that sense of lightness. Try to breathe to create more space, to hold on a little longer. And then to add a little extra bonus, if possible, holding steady with the fingertips, see if you can float your right heel off the ground. Breathe. And then slow motion, rise, release the feet and release the hands. Bring the hands back to the hips, lift and spread all 10 toes, and we'll go to the other side. Press the big toes down, anchor them, spread the little toes wide, and lift right heel to the very tip of your big toe. Tap and scrape at your mat with just your right big toe so you really get a sense of what it means to activate the big toes and root them down. Ground the big toes, spread the little toes wide, and bend your left knee. Keeping your left knee bent and the right toes active, cross your ankle on top of your left knee and sit down. Keeping the hips square, root down powerfully into the hips. Lift the low belly and the chest up with your breath and that sense of expanding light in your rib cage and around your heart. And then keeping that lift and that length, take your hands to your front shin and engage it by pushing down gently. Keep the breath steady, sit down low. Keep the hips rooted, take the arms up. Breathe into the upper back. Breathe between the shoulder blades. You can even take your right hand and feel the space of your traps and your shoulder blades and try to make it as soft as possible. And then keeping that sense of lightness, slowly rise, lifting the torso up, keeping the hips low and the left knee bent. Rise up and make space. And then holding with the fingertips as if you're grabbing hooks or handles or holding something powerfully, let your left heel float lightly off the mat. And then rise and gently release. Good, and come to stand. Spread the toes wide again. We're gonna do another balancing pose. Anchor the big toes, spread the little toes wide, balance on the right, lift the left heel to the pad of the big toe, anchor the big toe like we did before, and bend your right knee. Keeping the left toes spread, take your left foot up to your right inner thigh for tree pose. Vrikshasana. Take your hands to your hips, and no matter what direction your knee points, I want you to try and square your hips. If this is tough, initially you can hold on to the ankle and feel free to find some space at a wall to hold your balance if balance is tricky. Holding the ankle, or if you're ready, holding the hips, bend your right knee deep and start to sink your thigh bone back into the hip socket. By bending the knee, you're activating the leg a little more powerfully, which gives you a little more freedom to kind of rise up or distribute the weight or energy of your body more evenly. Lift the chin and the chest. If possible, take the right arm up, and then if possible, take the left arm up. Holding the hips steady, bend your right knee deep, lift and open the throat, lift the chest, start to raise your gaze up towards the ceiling or up towards the sky, wherever you're practicing. Look up and lift the chest as your gaze lifts. Keep your right knee bending deep. If you're staring at a ceiling, try to look at the wall behind you. If you're staring at the sky, try to look towards the space behind you and curl up so high, think vertical length, until you literally have to come out of the pose. Lift the chest, Keep the right knee bending and curl up and see if you can look back until you literally have to step out of the pose, okay? And I love doing that because it's a very safe way to test the limits. Obviously, if I said come out of the pose or fall out of the pose, hopefully you would have better sense than to just fall on your back. So you just release the foot and step it where it needs to go. But the idea of looking up and leaning back is opening up the front body so much that you have this increased space to really bring a certain sense of lightness more fully into your practice. Spread the toes wide, come to standing. With the left big toe as an anchor, little toe spread wide, lift the right heel to the pad of the big toe, bend your left knee, keep the right toes active, and take your right foot up to your left inner thigh. Holding the ankle if you need to, bend your left knee. If you can hold your hips, you'll have a better sense or tactile sense of where your hips are in space, and I want you to really square your hips no matter what direction your knee points in. So try to keep the hips level so that the spine that lengthens from the hips is also lengthening more evenly. Bend your left knee deep. Try to be a little lighter as you engage the left leg. Push the right foot into the leg, push the left foot against the right foot, and start to raise the arms. Maybe just one arm initially, or maybe both arms. Whatever you can raise, start to rise up and make a certain deeper space in the inner body with your breath. Sit down low, lift the gaze, open the throat and lift the chest together, and then see if you can follow the gaze towards the sky or ceiling and then maybe towards the space behind you. Keep the left knee bent, think vertical length, rise up tall, curl up until you can curl no more and you release out of the pose, okay? From there, come to the top of your mat, and then step your right foot back again. Take what's called horse stance, facing this side. Bring your hands down to your knees. Turn your toes out about 45 degrees, and bring your hands down to your knees so you can literally push your knees out so they line up with the toes. Oftentimes we'll kind of line up and our knees will be collapsing in a little bit. So I want you to be careful. How wide you go in your stance and how much you turn your feet out should depend on where your knees are pointing. So look at the center of your kneecaps. Make sure your toes are pointed and the distance of your stance is just perfectly wide enough to allow your knees to angle out over the centers of your feet. And then sit down low and notice that for me, I kind of tend to rest in my hands and my shoulders will shrug naturally and I'll just kind of relax. What I want you to do is once you've found this place of your foundation being steady, knees pointed at the toes, start to lift up with your torso. So you put a little more lightness into your upper body. Let the shoulders relax and the neck relax. And once again, come up onto fingertips. From fingertips, lift the heels of your feet up and float. And then let them come right back down, just like we did when we started. Lift the heels up again. Sit down a little lower this time, and then let the heels come down. One more time, lift the heels up, and then let them come back down. Sit down nice and low with the knees pointed out. Take the arms up. And as the arms float up, breathe into the upper back. Make space in the upper back with how you float the arms and how you hold them steady, but also free to move with the breath. And then lift the heels again. Stretch the belly and the rib cage up. Hold the hips down low as if you're holding something with your fingertips. Rise up through the sides of your body and then slow motion hinge forward. That same slow motion that we've done in all the forward bends, keeping the awareness of your back body strong. Same shape that you had when you were upright, and then lightly touch on fingertips. Release your heels and take your feet a little wider than we did in the first few forward bends. With the feet a little wider, grip with the toes. Try pressing just the big toes down and lifting the 4 little toes up. And then bend your knees and start to press your hips back. So all this sensitivity of fingertips and toes, and then ridge tops and balls of the feet, and then heels of the feet and heels of the hands is what I want you to really pay close attention to, because that's your foundation from which we can make a certain sense of lightness or heaviness. Because sometimes it's valuable to be heavy. Today we're working on the ability to make ourselves a little lighter, to be a little more buoyant, a little more spring-like or bouncy. And some days we'll really ground ourselves. But for today, really ground with sensitivity through fingertips and toes to kind of be a little more light in your body. Let yourself sway a little bit. Breathe deep. Root the hips back, stretch the belly and the rib cage forward, and then walk your hands, keeping the hips steady, walk your hands towards your left toes. Keep your hips steady so that the steadiness and the foundation in the hips and the steadiness of the legs allows the right side body to stretch away from the right hip. Breathe into that right side. And then pivot your left toes out, lift your right heel up, and take it down to the ground. So come into a low lunge with your fingertips on the inside of your left foot. Lift and spread your left toes, turn your foot out about a 45-degree angle. We're gonna come into what's called nuclear pigeon. Staying up on fingertips with your toes active, so your ankle in this position is in the same shape that it would be if you were standing on it. Come to the outer edge of your foot. Now what I mean by that is oftentimes when we come to the outer edge of our foot, we'll collapse our ankle, like you can see here. My inner ankle is now a little shorter than my outer ankle. So what I want you to do is with sensitivity through how you engage your toes and your foot is engage your inner and outer ankles so that the foot is in the same relationship to the shin as it would be if you were standing on it. Take the knee wide, take the right hand off the mat to the right, lean into the right hand and take your left hand to your inner knee, and as you push the left knee out to the left, breathe into the left hip, draw your right hip back into the socket to make yourself a little lighter through the hips. Oftentimes the stretch is mostly felt by sinking the hips really down low and deep. But I want you to protect your back hip flexor, your right hip, by pulling the thigh bone up and back into the hip socket so the hips can sway with a little more freedom. Take the left knee wide, breathe into the upper back, and start to lean back into your right arm. You can place the right hand wherever you need it to be so it's light enough to be up on fingertips or ridge tops. Breathe into the shoulders and lean back, opening the belly and the rib cage, taking the left knee to the left and pulling the right hip back into the socket. Take a deep breath in, stretch the left arm up, over the head, open the rib cage. And then as you exhale, release onto fingertips. Take the hands towards the front right corner of your mat, kind of on a diagonal from your hips, hands wider than shoulder distance apart, bend your elbows to sink the chest down low, but stay light up on fingertips, and then make your right knee a little lighter. Bounce it a little bit. Right knee doesn't go fully straight, it just kind of floats. Take the left knee wider and let the hips sway a little bit, and then release and walk the hands back into that wide stance that you came from with the feet, again, a little wider than they were when we were doing the forward bends at the middle of the class. Up on fingertips, take the breath back to the space you can create to the inner body. Lean the hips back, stretch the belly and the rib cage long and forward, and then walk your hands towards your back foot, your right foot, keeping the hips steady. So notice that as I move my hands, my hips and my back leg don't come with me. So I'm going to keep a slight bend in my back knee or my left knee, keep a slight bend in my right knee so that my side body can really open up and my rib cage can stretch. Breathe deep into that side body, rooting the hips back, and then pivot. Turn your toes towards the back wall. Let your left knee come down. Right toes curl up again to protect the ankle. And then come to the outer edge of the right foot, keeping that ankle engaged. Move your left hand off to the left. Make it light and take your right hand to your inner knee and push out. Take the hips back, open the throat, take the right knee wide. And as you take the right knee wide, be mindful of your left hip socket. Pull the left hip back. And in this view, you can see how the thigh bone goes back into the socket and pulls the knee down into the ground so that the hips can become lighter. And I can sway a little bit. Lean back into the left hand, lift the right shoulder up a little bit, and then inhale, take the right arm up and over the head to the left. Breathe into the upper back. Take the right knee wide. Take a deep breath in, and then softly release onto fingertips. Keep the right knee wide in that kind of diagonal towards the back, right corner of your mat. Lift your left knee and let it float. Breathe. Let your hips sway a little bit, soft and side to side. Good. And then release and pivot back between the legs. Take the feet a little closer in together. In fact, take your feet about shoulder distance apart. From the fingertips, once again, come down to ridge tops and lift the heels of your feet up. From ridge tops, let the palms of your hands come flat. Breathe deep and make a good amount of space between your hands and your feet, your hands and your hips, to push your sit bones back and up, lift onto very tiptoes and press with your breath down into your hands. Good. Now from here, I want you to rock back onto the balls of your feet and then lift up to toes. Rock back, sit back, and then lift up on the toes. And now we're going to do it with a little bit of a jump. So you lift as lightly as possible. Keep your toes active. Breathe deep. Try a few times and then land on toes. Come back onto fingertips. Now, if handstand is part of your practice, this would be the time to do it in this case. And you're free to hold handstand as long as you want. You just put the video on pause and take a few breaths in handstand. From here, up on toes, heels up. Take the fingertips to the crown of your head. Push the head up into your hands. Holding in this suspended position, push your hips back and slow motion with the head reaching up into the hands. Rise up to standing. Bend the knees with the heels still up. Tiptoe to the top of your mat. Take as many steps as you need, keeping the heels up. Ground yourself by gripping with the toes, rooting the hips down, and pressing the head up and back into the hands. And then inhale, float the arms up. Open the throat, lift the chin and the chest, and then softly rise to stand. And release your heels, and release your hands. But try not to release the light that you've worked on cultivating in your inner body. So maintain that same Tadasana that we've had throughout the class. Take a few deep breaths. And then at this point, I think we'll come to the wall to practice a little bit of the handstand. So you did the frog hops a few times. If you did handstand, great. Now is another opportunity to kind of access handstand if you're still a beginner at it, if you're still a little nervous at it, or even if you're pretty advanced at it. Doing handstand at the wall obviously makes it a little bit safer. So we're gonna pause, take your mat over to the wall, and then we'll restart at the wall in just a few moments. So once you're set up at the wall, what I want you to do is sit with your butt on the wall and your hands on your knees, just like where we started class, okay? So my feet are about a foot and maybe to a foot and a half away from the wall, okay? My toes are again spread wide, so I'm active through my feet. My shoulders are trying to relax as much as I, as an individual can, which I tend to store a lot of stress in my shoulders, so it's a constant practice. So as opposed to just letting them hang or opposed to pushing them down too hard, I try to really be buoyant and soft in my shoulders, even though I'm using my hands as my foundation. And then from here, I'm just gonna push my knees up into my hands, almost as if I was gonna lift my heels, which you can try lifting your heels a couple of times. But really the action I want you to get is to push the sit bones back and up the wall. And as the sit bones rise and push back into the wall, lift your belly and stretch it forward so you get lighter in your fingertips. Okay? So as opposed to kind of curling back and really curling the shoulders forward or curling the belly in, I want you to open the belly up and then just stretch it. Create some tension across your waistline, across your belly that allows the engagement to come from how you stretch rather than from how you contract. Stretch your belly forward, then stretch your arms forward. Breathe, okay? Now from here, count to like 10,000 and then we'll come back in 10 minutes or 20 minutes and when you're done. Just joking, okay? The reason I joke oftentimes in this position in my public classes is because this is hard, and holding for that long it seems a little ridiculous. So I want you to hold yourself with a sense of lightness and really breathe to create that lightness and still stretch away from the wall as your hips stay grounded. Keeping that stretch, lightly come onto your fingertips, maybe just your peace fingers at first, hips still on the wall, and then come onto all 10 fingertips and rock your hips off the wall. From fingertips, just as we've done in the wide stances, come down to ridge tops. So the knuckles root down, heels of the hands are up. Now from here, breathe. Now we're pretty close to the wall. It may seem to come into handstand that you're gonna wanna walk your hands away from the wall. You can walk a little bit if you feel way too tight, but I urge you to really stay close to the wall and just try to lift your hips up and become lighter on your feet. So from here, you're gonna lift the heels of your feet up, let the palms of your hands come down, and breathe deep. Keep the breath full. Now we're gonna go in stages. So you don't have to go into the full pose, but really try to be attentive to which stage you stop at. Keep the breath full, lift the heels of the feet up high, try to make your sit bones lighter, and then lean forward with your shoulders over your wrist. Take one foot up the wall about hip height onto your toes. Push through that foot and see if you can get your hips to rise up. Now this is stage one. You can stay here, or if possible, push through the foot that's on the wall and see if you can get your other foot up the wall. Now breathe. And from here, bend your knees and press your hips up as high as you can towards the ceiling. Literally with your knees bent, try to come onto tiptoes, be sensitive on the wall, and pull your hips up as high as you can, keeping the breath full and keeping the space in the upper back so you have freedom to move energy, Move breath. You even could relax your neck a little bit. Breathe deep, and if possible, you can take one leg off the wall to make it a little more advanced, keeping the knee bent, keeping the hips rising. You can switch legs, breathe deep, or with both feet on the wall, just hold steady, and then when you're ready, as soon as you're ready, before your elbows bend, lightly come down to all fours, and just take a moment to breathe and let the pose resonate through your body. Let the energy of your upper back settle. Feel the pulsation, how the energy moves. What I love about this is that it's so unusual to balance on our hands. Even though as yogis we practice it more and more often, it's that difference of turning our perspective literally upside down that really benefits how we then proceed and how we respond to all the subtle changes that are happening constantly around us in our daily lives. So the certain sense of lightness that comes from changing your perspective that much and appreciating a different perspective with regards to how you relate to the world is so empowering. So take a moment just on your knees and kneeling, once you've done a pose like that, to let that kind of sense of the pose resonate for you. And then when you're ready, you can try again as many times as you like. Try to go a little further, again, if you wish. Walking the feet up the wall with sensitivity, with power in the hands. We're going to proceed. We're going to give you a couple minutes to do that, and then we'll walk the mat back into where we started in the middle of the room, giving us enough space to kind of calm the body down and settle for a nice shavasana. So take a few minutes here, choose maybe to come back up the wall, and then we'll meet back in the middle of the room where we started. Once you bring your mat back into the middle of the room, come to standing at the top of your mat. Bring your hands to your hips, lift and spread your toes one final time, and then let just the big toes press. Spread the little toes wide. Take a few deep breaths. Take the arms out wide so you're in this kind of full Tadasana that has that sense of lightness while still staying grounded in your foundation, which is why we've paid such close attention through the last hour of the fingers and toes. Breathe deep, relax the jaw and the neck, let the shoulders be kind of buoyant and spacious, and on your next inhalation, float the arms up. Hold yourself steady and suspended. And then as if you're holding something with the fingertips, see if you can float the heels up lightly. Not to lift too high, not to kind of overextend and really work too hard, but just to be a little buoyant. Remember, the name of the game here is to try to make ourselves a little bit lighter. Lighter on the feet, lighter in the heart, even so light that maybe the corners of your mouth involuntarily rise. Lift the chin and the chest, sit down nice and low, rooting the hips and stretching the belly up. And then from here, keeping your torso this long, I want you to lightly take your right foot back to the ground and take your knee down. Breathe. As if you're holding something with the fingertips, lift the right knee and step up again, lift both heels. Breathe. We're gonna do the same with the left. Take your left foot back, let your left knee float down to the ground really lightly, lift the chin and the chest, and then from here, having done both legs, take your right foot back and come down to kneeling. Now from kneeling with the toes active and curled under, arms are still up, breathe. At this point, the shoulders should burn a little bit, so I want you to really tap into the breath and that sense of lightness that allows the arms to stay suspended and the torso to stay long. It's much easier just to say, oh my God, I'm done, I can't do it anymore, okay? But I want this idea of really practicing creating lightness to kind of go beyond our limits of how we hold in terms of our muscular strength. So from here, slowly begin to bow. Sending the hips back, stretching the chest and the heart forward. With lightness, float as long as possible, and then lightly touch your fingertips to the ground. Shift your knees to the right, come onto your left hip, and then swing your legs out long in front of you. Come to a seat. And from your seat, just a simple cross-legged seat, bring your fingertips behind you, and open the throat, lift the chin and the chest. Good, so now that we're on the ground, the tendency is to be like, oh, just like I did when we were standing, when the arms were getting tired, it's easier to be in this position. But if I showed up, or if you chose to kind of download one of my videos and you looked at me and I said, I'm gonna teach you about yoga and the form of my body and my posture was held in this way, I bet there'd be a lot more skepticism than there is. So lift up tall, use the fingertips like a kickstand to really open up and create that sense of light, not just in the physical form, but also in the inner body. Like What are you connected to? What really inspires you to show up? What really inspires you to really work hard and make a full expression? Put that into your posture so the energy is really full. And then from here, stretch the legs long, keeping the toes active. Cross your left ankle on top of your right knee. We're going to do the same thing with the ankle as we did in that nuclear pigeon variation. Toes spread wide. Take your right ankle underneath your left so your shins are stacked and parallel with the front of your mat. Now you'll notice that my knees and shins are off, okay? It's because I have really tight hips, but in regards to opening up and kind of making space in my hips, I'm going to make my ankles really strong. So you notice the bottom ankle is lifted up. You notice my top foot, my ankles lifted up. It'd be very easy for me just to let my ankles collapse and let my shins stack, okay? But in order to kind of create a certain awareness and sensitivity of how I'm wishing to create myself and the intention with which I hold this pose, I activate my feet and ankles, which pulls me out of the pose a little bit. With my fingertips behind me, I'm going to lift my torso, lift my chest, and then make myself light enough to maybe become a little heavier in the shins and ankles and hips. Keep the throat open, the chest lifted. And then from here, keeping your right hand behind you, I'm going to take my left hand on my foot and twist gently over my right shoulder, holding my hips steady. Keep the breath full, the throat open. Oftentimes when we twist, we'll kind of just grind it out, tuck our chin, roll our shoulders, and really just kind of twist as much as possible. I want you to lift and open up. Even breathe into the right shoulder so it's free to move. Inhale, come back through center. Switch hands. So left hand goes behind you. Keep the feet and take your right hand to your right knee. Right hand to the left knee. And open the throat and chest and twist over the other shoulder, the left shoulder. Toes are still active. And I have to fight to keep my bottom ankle really sensitive. Toes are active. Root the shins, lift the heart, and twist. And then inhale, come back to center. On fingertips, you can lean back enough to release your feet and switch your ankles. Right ankle on top, left ankle underneath, and again, really be attentive to the ankles. So the feet are active, so that the feet and the muscles of the feet are controlling how the foot is shaped in relationship to the shin. Keep that and lift the chin and the chest, open the throat. So from the fingertips, make yourself lighter in the torso, in the belly, and in the heart to make space to maybe go a little bit deeper into the fire. This pose is called Agni Stambhasana, or fire log pose, for a reason. We have to burn it out a little bit sometimes in order to transform. We temper that burn, we temper that fire with how we breathe, with the air, okay, and the sense of lightness that we create. So the fire has space to not burn too hot or too tall. Keep the left fingertips behind you, take your right hand to your right foot and twist over the left shoulder gently, keeping the throat open, the chin and chest lifted. So you have space to move a little more freely. There's not too much tension in one particular area, and there's still space to go a little deeper if we want to push a little harder. Take a deep breath in, twist a little further, and then untwist. Hold the shins strong in this position, switch hands. Right hand behind, left hand to the right knee, and twist over the right shoulder. Lift the chin and the chest, open the throat and twist. And then inhale, come back to center. So once you're back in center, release the feet, settle, and from here, shift onto your right hip, come down to your right elbow, shift down, stretch your right arm straight onto your right shoulder, onto your right side, and then gently come onto your back with your knees bent and your feet flat as wide as the mat. So feet nice and wide, take the arms up overhead and just breathe. At this point, when we come onto our backs, oftentimes we'll just kind of collapse and let the ground hold us, which feels pretty good right about now. After a long practice, after we've pushed and pulled ourselves with such attentiveness and sensitivity, oftentimes it's perfectly fine just to kind of let go and let ourselves be held by whatever energy is left. But before we do that, let's maintain a little bit of sensitivity and consciousness, open up the hips a little more, and really bring some space into the side bodies. Take your right knee down towards your left ankle. Take your left foot on top of your right knee. And press the right knee down gently and stretch your right arm overhead. So this is called windshield wipers pose. So from here, I want you to open the throat, breathe deep into the right side body. So the right rib cage broadens, the right hip broadens. Right knee stretches down towards the top of your mat, and the right arm reaches up in the opposite direction. Breathe into the right shoulder, even into the right side of your neck and the right side of your throat and jaw. Make space on that right side. Take a few deep breaths here, opening up and really focusing on the right side body, but keeping the toes, the left toes included, active. On your next inhalation, gently release. Come back up to center. Hold for a moment in the center with the feet nice and wide, almost as wide as the mat. And then take the left knee down. Right foot on top of the left knee and stretch the left arm. Breathe into the left side body. Left rib cage, left hip, left side of your neck, left shoulder blade. Open up and stretch that left side long. Take a few deep breaths. And then on your next inhalation, gently release. Come back to center with both arms up overhead and really reach out through the fingertips. Slide one leg straight at a time. Reach out through the heels and the toes. Take a few deep breaths and try to soften the effort required to fill your inner body with light and with breath. And as you're reaching out and making that space, allow your outer body to settle. And then softly release your hands. And there's something I want to say special about the hands here in this Shavasana. Place your hands wherever you feel inspires a certain sense of lightness. For some of you, that may mean keeping them stretched up overhead. For some, that may be like in a cactus pose by your side, or arms completely down by your side in the traditional position for Shavasana, or maybe even hands on your heart or your belly. Wherever your hands need to go, to inspire that sense of lightness in your inner body and to maintain that sense of lightness as you surrender and settle onto your back for Shavasana. Allow yourself to settle, but maintain a certain sense of consciousness that allows you to feel the practice. Fill your inner body and allow your outer body to reawaken your inner body before moving your outer body. Softly and slowly begin to move your fingers and toes, reawakening the periphery of your body with sensitivity. Move your wrists, your ankles. Gently rock your head side to side. Open and close your mouth. And on your next inhalation, stretch your arms freely overhead if you wish. Once again, reach out through your heels and toes, and keeping as much of that space that you've created throughout the class, gently bend your knees and roll down to your right side. Using your right arm as a pillow, even here being attentive to how you hold a certain sense of lightness in your body, with regards to the breath, with regards to how you engage. As softly as possible, bring yourself back up, using your hands heavy on the mat. Sit tall at the top of your mat, and if your block or your blanket are close by, sit like we did at the beginning of class. Sit on top of whatever you sat on to start. Propping yourself up. Allow your energy to settle. Allow this sense of lightness to come back into the active body. And on your next inhalation, let your arms float up above the head like where we began. Tip your sit bones back, let your belly open to the point that you could lift your sit bones softly off of whatever you're sitting on, your block or your blanket, and then reach them back to settle. Lift the heart up high, stretch the arms up high. Take a deep breath in, and then softly as you exhale, let the hands fold together at the center of your heart, touching lightly on fingertips. In honor of how you create lightness in your everyday life. In honor of the energy required and the sensitivity required to be a little lighter in the way in which you engage the world around you. On your next inhalation, lift your heart toward your hands. And as you exhale,